featuring the amazing Rose Eveleth, who is a science journalist and someone who we had originally invited out back in April, but there were crazy flight issues and storms, and she wasn't able to get here. So for the 21st Century Scientist workshop that we did in April, Rose managed to remotely do the workshop component, and then of course we missed out on a really fabulous public talk. So we insisted on her coming back, and she was kind enough to be able to come back in September. Back in April, I was like, I don't know, 4 or 5 months pregnant, so this baby was on the inside. Now we had to wait some time to get Rose back, so now you get to see her on the outside. I wanted to tell you just a tiny bit about Rose. She's a producer, designer, writer, and animator based in Brooklyn, and she's dabbled in everything from research on pelagic invertebrates to animations about beer to podcasts about fake tumbleweed farms. And these days she explores how humans tangle with science and technology. I'm guessing a lot of you who are here know about her really cool work with ESPN's 30 for 30 podcast, as well as probably what she's best known for, which is the awesome futurist podcast, Flash Forward. It's been on a number of best of podcasts, best of science podcasts. It's a really fun mix of journalism and fiction, and I think offers some really interesting and often hopeful futures, which I think sometimes in this climate we need hopeful futures. So on that note, Rose is going to be talking to us today about how the future is for everyone. So thinking about inclusion and equity issues, or sometimes lack thereof, in futurist thinking. So without further ado, I'm very excited to have Rose come speak to us today.
This was at one point a keynote, and now it's a PowerPoint, so please forgive some of the formatting that's happening right now. I am a designer. Don't judge me by this. So yes, I'm Rose. I want to talk about the future, who gets to imagine it, what those imaginations look like, and how we can imagine better futures and invite more people to imagine those futures. And one of the main things I want to talk about is the ways in which futurism, I'm going to spoil it for you, isn't usually about the future. It's usually about what we're worried about right now. If you ever read science fiction, it's often about what's happening now. And I'm going to start with just a quick example of sort of how that is true and how to kind of think about futures when you encounter them in your life. So I'm going to start with, that's not what I want to do. I want to go to the next slide. Okay. I write about technology. I can use technology. So this is a brief history of the future of kitchens. And sort of the ways in which looking at the future of kitchens can tell us about what's going on in the world. I think that domestic spaces are actually the best place to do this because often they sort of slip under the radar from a lot of tech criticism because they're not seen as technical because they're domestic. That's a whole other bias that we have. So I want to start in, 1893. 1893, this is the World's Fair in Chicago. This is the first time that we really get sort of domestic science, home economics, sort of that term starts to happen around here, in a sphere like the World's Fair, which is sort of for innovation, for men in nice suits coming to talk about all their innovations and their inventions. And so we're starting to see, obviously there has been innovation and invention in domestic spheres forever. But this is the first time it sort of gets wrapped into sort of a more academic environment, a place where people are valorized as these sort of innovators and inventors and these really important people. Fast forward to 1933, this is another World's Fair, once again in Chicago. And this is the Century of Progress. This is sort of the theme of the fair. And as a part of the Century of Progress, there is a whole contest for homes of the future. And these are all the homes that various companies imagined. And you can see sort of from this smattering of things, the different futures people are imagining, right? This future looks quite different from this future. This one's built of steel. It's a steel house, which I love. So like very 1933. So you've got a sort of roundish house. You have one made all of wood, right? These are clearly occupying different futures. What you can actually do at this World's Fair is go in, take a tour of the house, and then leave with plans, architectural plans. You could then go and make your own version. I actually tried to track down any house that was made from that. I could not find one, but if you know of anyone who built a house from this, I'm really excited about it. Here's a little bit more of some of the insides of some of these. This is from one of the programs from the fair. You can see this has like a whole brick wall inside, and then that one's the steel one down there. So you just sort of have all of these different imaginations about what the future home might look like. I just can't get enough of these, so I'm going to show you a couple more. So you can go in, you can see these rooftops. This is a steel house, and I don't know if you can read it, but it's steel construction, and it's fireproof and sanitary. The things you want in a house, right? These homes actually, how many of you have seen this Indiana Dunes National Park? These homes actually still exist. You can go see them, not that far from here. Often when I give talks, they're like really far away. But here, you're like not actually that far from Indiana Dunes National Park. All the houses are moved there. People actually still live in them. And once a year, you can take a tour of these houses. And it's amazing. I highly recommend it. There's actually currently a funding battle going on to try to preserve them because it costs a lot of money to preserve houses that were built in the 33, and they weren't really built to last. They were kind of built as exposition houses, so they were kind of falling apart. But so now we're going to go to 1956. This is a short film that GM made called Design for Dreaming. It's about 10 minutes long. We're not going to watch the whole thing, sadly, but I highly recommend you check it out because you can find it on the internet. It's very easy to find. It's called Design for Dreaming. It might look kind of familiar to you because it's actually been sampled in a ton of like music videos and other things. It's, 9 Inch Nails plays it at their concerts in the background. It was in Hills Have Eyes in like the intro scene. It was in the music video for Superconductor and In Your Eyes. So it's a lot of places. So it might look kind of familiar. We're going to start at sort of the middle. Basically what happens in this film is that a woman falls asleep. She is visited in her sleep by a masked magical man. He whisks her away to first a car show where she sees all these beautiful GM cars. And he says to her, oh, take whichever one you want. She's so overwhelmed by all the choices that she thinks. And someone off camera yells, get her to the kitchen, quick. We're going to start there. Oh, also it's a musical. It's a musical. This is not the only future that was imagined. This was 1956, right around the same time. There we go. You have this on the left, the Monsanto kitchen of the future. This is before Monsanto was known for agriculture and other things. This was when it was of plastics, mostly for plastics. This kitchen is entirely made of plastic. Very easy to clean. And you have a similar sort of film that they made where someone is sort of clinging to her lovely kitchen that she loves so much. And this is sort of, these are interesting companion pieces because they sort of illustrate a couple things that are happening in 1956, 1957. You have sort of a tension now between women who, many of whom found work during the war and now are asked to go back and no longer work those jobs as men return. But they're being promised, oh no, don't worry, your kitchen is going to be so much better, it's going to be so much easier to use, you're going to be able to do things like save time, and you know that when she saves all that time making that cake, she doesn't like go off and get a job, right? She golfs, she goes to the beach, she sort of things. This is not they're not time saving so that you can go do things like work. That would be ridiculous. So you also have the sort of race for innovation. This is like sort of a post-war US that is really interested in automation and innovation and trying to keep up and be the most technically advanced that there is. So you see all of this happening in these kitchens. I'll show you a couple more images of kitchens of the future from that era. And it sort of balances this sort of like interesting, like retro, to us now retro, obviously at the time not retro, sort of way of being in the kitchen. And these images are fun, right? There's sort of a Pinterest trend of like retro futurism now. People just like love these like quirky, sort of like sexist images of the future. But I think that actually it's worth applying what we just sort of talked about and sort of the ways we can look at these kitchens and think about what they're saying about the time to the kitchens that we're seeing now proposed. So I'm going to show you, the newest Windows update features here. Great news. I'm going to show you a couple of photos and pictures of sort of design kitchens from the last 5 years or so. So this one is by a design company called Padini. This is a concept artist who is working on microbes to feed us. This is from Samsung. This is from IKEA. This one's also IKEA. And this one is my favorite. This is the robot. Did you notice anything about those images?
All white women.
Yeah. All women, all white women. Apparently it's more realistic that a robot will make your dinner than a man in the future. Which is weird because actually men are cooking more and more now. There's like lots of good data about this. The food industry is embracing men as home cooks. So not only is this not futuristic, it's actually kind of regressive. And yet, this is what we're seeing in these images of the future of kitchens, right? There are a couple more images. So just to compare and contrast our old kitchen images and our new kitchen images, they're not that different. Sorry. And so I think that just to apply those same sort of rigorous questions that you're asking when you're seeing these older futures and what they're saying about that time period, it's worth using those same questions to think about what we're seeing now. And this is sort of embodied in a paper by Jokish K and Genevieve Bell about the house of tomorrow, and it says the house of tomorrow is a vision perpetually deferred and one that tells us more about the preoccupations of the time than it does about the designs of the future. And I would argue that you could replace house of tomorrow with just futurism and future proposals in general. And it's just telling us a lot about what we think about roles, what we think about people are supposed to be doing, what is normal, what is good, what is desirable. And I think a lot of that comes from, a lot of these designs come from people who don't generally occupy those traditionally domestic roles, right? A lot of the people at those companies that are making those futures maybe don't spend a lot of time in the kitchen. And so here are some examples of inventions that have been made by people who I suspect don't spend a lot of time in the kitchen. This is an invention that is basically a top-down camera for your refrigerator. So when you are at the grocery store, you can pull it up and say, oh, do I have eggs? Yes, I have eggs. Does anyone fridge just doesn't look like that? No. I would love for my fridge to look like that, but it doesn't. And I don't know of anyone who has a refrigerator who looks like that on the inside. If you had a camera at the top of every layer of your refrigerator, I think it would still be relatively difficult to tell what was inside of it. I suspect that this man's refrigerator does not look like that. Or if it does, he has a very limited diet and he's much more organized than I am. Maybe it does, But I wonder, the people who designed this, what their refrigerators look like, and how much time they spend like opening them and cleaning them and all that sort of stuff. I want to show you a couple more inventions. These are all real inventions, by the way. These are not fictional. Upper left there is a fork that tells you sort of the dietary contents of what you're eating. So it can tell you if you've eaten too much salt or too much fat. For whatever sort of target you apply. Similar concept with the cutting board there. It's supposed to be able to tell you some dietary information about the object you're cutting on it. I will say I don't know how well that works or how it would work or any of that. I think it might not. But this is a thing that people sell and buy. This is sort of an egg freshness checker. Here is sort of your Internet of Things connected set of devices. So you have your cutting board, you also have your mixology, you have your app-connected refrigerator, crock pot, and coffee. The bottom left is my favorite example of something where I'm like, I wouldn't use that for lunch. which is that you can, with this lovely screen here, the actual example they use in the press release, I'm not making this up, you can say in your mother-in-law, and she can help you cook by giving you directions while you're doing it. I'm wondering, maybe that person has a really great relationship with their parents. I love my mother-in-law, but like, I don't want her like literally like big brother standing there being like, no, too much salt, no, like that's not gonna be fun for anyone, in my opinion at least. And then you have sort of the Internet of Things question, which generally it works by saying, okay, well, your kitchen in your house is gonna learn about you. And it's gonna say, okay, she normally likes coffee at 6:45, and she normally, I might wanna make this colder and this hotter, or I'm gonna turn on the crock pot, and I'm gonna learn your habits. Which, hacking questions aside, which are very large questions about people who can hack into your home and learn your information and also spy on you, those people don't seem to have like children or pets who like to push buttons. Because if you do, the idea of having a nice touchpad that can learn and schedule things for you sort of becomes obsolete. Unless you can train your children and pets not to touch them, which I would like to learn from you. But I have another question for you. What does your dream future kitchen include?
Sharp knives.
Sharp knives, okay. Anything else? Maybe like it cleans itself? Yeah, like that would be really nice, right? Like a kitchen that cleans itself. How many kitchens of the future that I could find do you think included that? None of them. Oh, click the next slide. 0, that's a big 0. I have questions about that, including maybe the people who are designing these futures don't clean their kitchens very often. Maybe they're not the person in the home who does that. This is a guess. And actually, in my research and interviewing people, when I asked about this, that was the answer that I got. Was it did not occur to them that might be a desirable function, which is fine. But maybe ask some other people who will maybe do that in your research for providing your product. So why do these things happen? Why is it that you get these ideas of the future that maybe are a little bit disconnected from the reality of work that might be traditionally coded as work that women do, work that the people who design these futures don't do? Well, here's one potential answer. The World Future Society is 77% male. The Association of Professional Futurists is 66% male. I have asked them for racial background. They don't have that information, but I feel very confident, having attended these meetings and talked to a lot of people, that is largely white men, able-bodied, white, straight men, which is a certain kind of person who imagines a certain kind of future, like a robot making dinner. Which might be really cool. I mean, I would love a robot making dinner. That'd be but I would also like for it to clean up afterwards, maybe. So I wanted to show a couple of other examples of sort of the results of this world in which the people who are given the platform and are able to call themselves futurists and are able to sort of get the money for research and the platform to talk about the research about the future, the kinds of futures that maybe they do or don't think about, and the results of that. It's kind of funny to look at these kitchens and be like, haha, okay, this is kind of silly, but this actually has some real implications for where we go, because the future and the way we talk about the future says a lot about now, but it does impact where we go. So I'm going to play for you a little video. It is a little bit long, but I think the payoff is worth it, so let's just do it.
Television broadcast is due by Network at 2:40 on Saturday the 18th. There are only delays in all areas except for Sunday. The general synopsis of 1800, Iceland 960, drifting slowly east and filling. Low 250 miles northeast of Reserve 940 by 1800 Sunday. High Nostalgia 1033, slow moving with little change. The area forecast for the next 24 hours, Viking north and south exterior forecast.
This little device is Japanese, but there are several things that we look at. Is it possible to have a little band that encircles the name? 150.
We are seeing the entire shape
changing before our eyes.
Look at that. It is right up. It's almost breaking our spinometer.
Horrifying column that for the Lib Dems, down 27%.
Hiking, northwest 5 or 6. Wintry showers, good, occasion 4. North at 0, south at 0, east 40s. Variable 4, becoming southeasterly 5 or 6. West 40s, chromacy 4.
No way, no red line for you as well. Let's see, no way. You're right. So, chapter all 254. Now, I think you probably will. I mean, I'll tell you what, you've got several years or something. Okay. I can hardly that's the odds against you. I'm thinking
The sharks are focusing all their attention on the offshore islands, full of young seals. By watching how the sharks hunt here, Alison has learned what time of day an attack is likely.
There's the double conference at 0700 GMT. How is Beckman, Motherboard, Stopper, springtime, good. That is becoming platonic good. Hamburg Town, Stratford, Leyland Drought, Dover Soul, 8 red, good. What for?
okay, let's realize. New York City from Andy and Judith. 50. David and Rachel, are you sick? Is it good?
Light getting inside the telescope, the astronauts had to get the latch to lock.
Even if you can't be just working some stories back together, to close the gap. Press on, you got a way to do it, do it.
Trap and a ratchet, floating Story Musgrave improvised a solution. It was a success. The astronauts were elated.
That's by Superflux, which is a design studio out of the UK, and I love that piece because it sort of turns a lot of things on their head. The smart fork is a real thing that we saw. That is an actual invention that people are trying to sell. And I think that, these people, the people who design these things, they have really good intentions. They want people to be healthier. But they also sort of assume that, particularly seniors in this case, are sort of a blank box in which they can project whatever they want. Of course they'll follow the instructions, and of course they'll do this thing. And I love the moment when you realize sort of what he's doing, and it's this delightful surprise. And then I asked myself, well, why am I surprised by that? Why is it surprising that he would figure this out? They're smart, they're people. It's not surprising that someone, you and I trick our devices all the time when we don't feel like listening to them. Why would that not be the case for a senior? And just this idea that, if you want to help people, and maybe having this kind of app solution where people can check in on you and kind of spy on your food intake and all this stuff, is that really the sort of way to do it? And I would guess that the people who design the smart board and push these sort of devices don't consult with a lot of seniors about what they would actually do with this stuff, which I think is an issue. Just a couple of other examples of ways in which people get left behind when the majority of people imagining the futures in building technology are a certain kind of person. There's one artificial heart that is approved on the market, and it fits 80% of women, 80% of men, and only 20% of women. Now many people say, okay, well men die of heart disease a lot more, they need hearts more. That is true, but women are actually far more likely to die on the waiting list for a heart transplant, which is what these artificial hearts are used sort of as a stopgap for, because they just can't have them. I talked to people who make this artificial heart, and they're kind of sort of working on a smaller one for women, but not any real urgency because they don't really feel like it. You also have examples of just sort of really big problems with technology. On the left, you have an example where Google Photos was trying to tag things, and they tagged two people who are friends as girls, which is not funny at all. It's extremely problematic and very racist. And this is like the worst thing that can really happen to a situation like this. How does a program come out that hasn't been tested, like on people of color? You also have a Nikon camera that any person who is Asian is going to be tagged as blinking in the system. So a lot of the time when I talk to people about this, they say things like, oh, well, it's just an algorithm. Algorithms can't be racist. They're not people. But let's back up a little bit. How does something like this happen is the more interesting question. How do you put out a product that does this? It's probably because in facial recognition systems, when you want to train your machine, you need to have a huge bank of faces, right? And the bank of faces that is available to you is all white people. And that is what you have, and no one has really gone out and tried to fix that problem because they don't really see it as a problem. And then you have that. You have a situation where you're maybe testing it in the office, and maybe all the people in your office are white, or a certain kind of person. And they don't, so it doesn't register that this, did someone blink. There was a famous case also where certain laptops would recognize a face when it was in front of them. And there's a really famous video where a white person sits down and the system's immediately like, oh yes, there's a face. And a black person sits down and the system is like, I see no face there. And you're like, did you literally have not a single person of color sit in front of this machine before you said to sell it to like millions of people? And maybe the answer is yes, because maybe you didn't even think of it. If your office is sort of like monochromatic, perhaps it literally did not even occur to you. And that's how you wind up with things like this. And this is obviously a huge problem and should be fixed. There are also some very drastic results. So this is a piece that was written by some folks at ProPublica about an algorithm that is used to determine whether or not someone should get parole. And basically it takes all these sort of pieces of information, puts them into a system, and then spits out a score that says how likely is this person to recommit a crime. If you take people who have very, very similar, if not identical, crimes, and you put them through the system, a person who is white will get a much lower score in the sense that they will probably not recommit, and a person who is black will get a much higher score. And so there's a lot of this piece is amazing. This is a really interesting piece of data analysis that they did, and they sort of broke it down because actually the challenge in writing a piece like this is that those algorithms aren't public. You actually can't get access to them. You have no idea what goes into them and how they are built. So they did a lot of sort of reverse engineering of trying to figure out even what are they looking at, like what are the things that you're looking at. And the fact that there's this public sentencing system that is now being driven by a completely private and inaccessible algorithm is also a problem. Just a couple more recent examples that in the past couple of weeks. This is a paper that was published recently that can identify people who are wearing masks, largely targeted at protesters, at movements. So if you are the government and you would like to know who is protesting, and perhaps they would like for you not to know who they are, and are wearing a mask, this is a system that could, in theory, identify those people. And you have some questions about how this might be used and why. This is a paper that got a lot of attention recently, which is the facial recognition system that can identify gay people. I'm using finger quotes because I don't think it actually works. But the system that they used was A, all white faces, B, all only sort of nobody who identifies as bi or sort of anyone outside of the very sort of edge spectrum there. And it claims that it can do this. Now, there's a big asterisk there. You can't do this in a facial recognition system, but that does not mean that governments will not try it or use it. In fact, with the sentencing program, there's actually no evidence that it does a better job of predicting recidivism than anything else, but we're using it anyway. And there are lots of places in the world in which being gay is still considered a crime punishable by death. This is not great for those people. And so you have to think sort of about okay, when you're building these systems and you're thinking about this, why are you doing it? And sort of what are you using to train it, and then what are the results? Sort of why is this the future that you're sort of going down? Why is this the path you're going down? So when you take a look at what popular futurists are talking about, and I'm using sort of the term futurist really broadly here. A lot of futurists actually and have actually objected to the way that I'm using the term futurist. Futurism is a sort of interesting field that is a combination of a lot of things. There's strategic foresight, there's economics, and lots of stuff. But then there are also sort of people like Elon Musk and Peter Thiel who are like popular futurists, is what I would say. They're presenting a vision of the future. They would probably consider themselves futurists even if they don't have a degree in strategic foresight. You can figure out what those words are. Launching people into space, digging tunnels underneath LA as a proposal that we're talking about, jetpacks, hoverboards, preparing for the singularity, collecting blood from young mice, trying to live forever, that's real. So there's lots of things that these people are talking about doing. I don't know about you, but like these things are not really relevant to my life. And what they're not talking about are things like, what is the future of police brutality? Will I have a job? What is the future of mental health coverage or climate change? That's not that interesting to those people because they don't have to worry about that stuff. There's a really great futurist named Madeline Ashby who has a quote that I love to use, which is, living forever is great if you make compound interest. So if you're already really rich, living forever is like super great. You're gonna make a lot of money. If you're not, and if you are in a position where you're just trying to get by day to day, living forever is probably not at the top of your list of things that you might be thinking about. And then also, one of the episodes of Flash Forward, people asked me to do an episode on living forever over and over and over again, and I was like, I don't care about this. But eventually I ended up talking to a couple of activists about what it would be like if you could apply longevity technology to sentencing. So if you could sentence someone to 300 years in prison instead of life in prison, or whatever it is, or what does life in prison mean if you're sentencing someone and you can extend their life forever, and how will that be applied probably unequally to the people who are being sentenced? So these are some questions that it's worth asking yourself about. And so when you see a future, and when you see a future being proposed, and I want to say that anytime you're seeing anybody talk about almost anything, they're proposing a future to you, right? Politicians are proposing a future to you, but so are technologists, so are scientists. Everyone is sort of saying, here's what I think should happen. Here's what I think would be good, or bad, right? People are proposing ideas about what the future should look like. And it's worth asking yourself questions about those futures as you encounter them. Questions like, who is this for? Who wins and who loses in this future? How does this impact the most vulnerable? Who can afford it? Who can't afford it? And what happens if you can't afford it? What happens when Apple owns your face and you can't afford to buy it back from them? That's the thing that lawyers are actually talking about right now, whether your biometric data is protected. So right now, the law says that your biometric data is actually not protected. It can be searched and seized. But the capacity or the contents of your brain cannot. So I would highly recommend you all use an actual passcode on your phone, because if the police officers ever want to get into it, they can actually compel you to put your fingerprint on it, but they cannot compel you to tell the password. Just FYI. In case you ever find yourself in that situation. So I want people to be thinking like what your future looks like, because you might not consider yourself a futurist, but in a lot of cases you are making decisions about what you think the future should look like. Anytime you think about sort of who you're voting for or what you're deciding to spend your money on, you are making a decision about what you think the future should look like. There's a really amazing science fiction writer and activist named Adrienne Marie Brown, and she has this really great concept that I love to use. She says, as long as the future comes from imagination, there will be divergent paths that are moving in and out of alignment and in and out of conflict. And she sort of frames this conversation about the future, and in her work it's largely around police brutality, but I think it can be applied to sort of all kinds of future thinking, which is that we are in an imagination battle right now. There are people who have imaginations about what the world should be like, and they may or may not align with yours. And we're all sort of fighting for whose imagination wins. And this is really applicable to all sorts of things. Climate change, vaccines. Some people imagine that when their kid gets a vaccine, something's going to happen. That's a battle of imagination. It's not really a battle of facts, right? Same thing with climate change. We're all sort of battling for whose imagination of what the future could or should be wins. And so I think that when we think about the future, and we think about who gets to make it and who gets to talk about it, and whose imagination gets to have a voice and sort of gets to have a platform and gets to be made into reality, or just gets to be just considered as valid. All of you have valid imaginations and should use them as much as possible. And B, it's worth thinking about, if you're only seeing the imaginations of a certain kind of person, they're going to cluster together. And what does that mean, and what are the results of that, and how do people benefit or are hurt from that? So go forth and use your imagination, and I hope it wins. And that's all I have to say. I don't know if this is a good or bad sign. You can do everything. She's got the baby, she's got to run the mic. Super mom. I know you all came to see the baby. That's why I came.
Okay, good, that's work. So I was wondering if you could maybe talk a little bit about how this relates to accessibility and disability technologies. So for example, like a lot of prosthetic limbs that are coming out now are, like bionic, or like they actually work with machines versus myoelectric arms, things like that, but they're not really being made for the disabled community who needs them right now. That may be the case, something is broken. Or for example, this wheelchair I'm sitting in right now, 5 years ago cost $40,000, this year costs $94,000. So maybe if you could just kind of talk about that aspect of futurism.
Yeah, it's a huge blind spot, I think, in general. I think that futurists often engage with disability in a really harmful way, where they're like, we're going to fix you, this is going to be fixable. And I think, there's a really, one way to look at that, or one sort of like product to use sort of as an example, is exoskeletons, right? People are obsessed with these exoskeletons that are going to make people walk again, because walking is like the ultimate goal, and like all you want to do in your life is walk. And a lot of people who don't walk are like, no, I'm good. Like, that's not my goal here. Like, I would like to have a ramp to be able to go do something. I'd like you to not build your building such that I literally cannot access them. That would be nice. Instead of spending millions of dollars on this like kind of bionic human situation. I think that it's a huge issue, and it's a huge blind spot in futurism specifically. I mean, when you look at science fiction, there are no disabled characters in science fiction. We sort of assume like, oh, that's just going to go away, and we're just going to not have that anymore. There's a really great science fiction anthology called Accessing the Future, and it's all written by disabled authors about sort of disability in the future, and I really love that. And I think there are a couple people now who are really pushing this conversation in futurism, because so much of futurism is so like hurtful and harmful when they talk about disabled people. First of all, because they talk about them as if they like don't exist or can't hear or can't like be part of the conversation, which is obviously not true. But also it is very much in the mode of fixing, of sort of like solving this problem for you, not with you. I mean, the examples you gave are good ones in terms of both wheelchairs, limbs. I mean, they're sort of, the way the futurists think about things is there are the people who sort of lost limbs in sort of some sort of accident, and those are like worthy people who need like helping because they are like, potentially soldiers or whatever. And then there's like the disability community that they like don't know how to handle, because A, it's wildly diverse, and just lumping them together as like disabled people like is not really helpful, because there's like such a wide range of experiences. And also because it's, they're much more vocal about like not wanting to be fixed. And not wanting to, like, that's not the way of speaking about this, that's not what we're looking for. I mean, like, I would love if every futurist read about the social model of disability, like, literally ever at any point in their career. I don't know how many of them have. But yeah, I think there are some really good people who are working on this a lot. Damien Wolven has a lot of really great work on disability in the future. But yeah, I think it's like, it's a huge blind spot, because a lot of people just assume that like that's going to go away, or it's going to be fixed, or whatever it is, which like clearly doesn't make any sense, but it's magical thinking, I guess.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Actually, so I have a comment in the question. Yeah. So you just reminded me, there was a great Outer Limits episode like many years ago where it was one of the situations where there was like a brain implant that you used to access the internet essentially, and people who couldn't, their brain were not compatible with those implants were considered disabled, and then of course bad things happened, and I won't ruin it. But anyway, so I thought that was a really interesting one, because that kind of revolved around that. My question was about, just very recently there's been a bit of controversy about this. It was like an app/vending situation where there's like, oh, we're going to get rid of this bodegas.
Yes.
And so can you talk about that? Because of course that crosses many aspects of automation, non-understanding communities, racial dynamics.
Yeah, so what she's talking about is there's an app that, or it's not even an app, it's a startup that is trying to quote unquote disrupt bodegas. I don't know how many of you are familiar with a bodega. I don't know if, do you have bodegas here? Is that a thing? No. Okay, all right, so a bodega is a very important institution in cities where it's like a corner store, basically. And bodega cats are like a very key part of it. There should be a cat inside. No, they're, I live in New York City, and bodegas are, not only are they very important to sort of like they're like a sort of community space for a lot of people. They tend to cluster in low-income areas. They're very much coded as sort of like things for people of color, like they often need to be like renovated so that you now get like organic food instead, because they're seen as like kind of dirty and whatever, but they're super important community spaces in a lot of places. And they're also just sort of a signifier of a lot of things for people who are trying to gentrify a neighborhood. Often when a neighborhood gets gentrified, one of the first things that goes is the bodega. It's sort of a good sign of like what's happening in your neighborhood. And so there is now a startup that is basically, quote unquote, trying to disrupt bodegas by having what are basically just vending machines. It's literally a vending machine. But they're trying to sell it as like a bodega because it's going to have like not just one kind of food or drink in it. And it will be located in apartment buildings, in the lobby, or in dorms and things like that. The press release is actually a really great like reader in people who are out of touch with like the communities in which they might be trying to serve. They use the examples that they use of like where people live are literally apartment buildings with doormen and dorms. Those are the only two like places that people live, which is like not great. And so it's actually worth looking up the press release because it does a lot of things. Like it's a really great little sort of like distilled version of this, where you can sort of see someone who, you know, had maybe a problem in their life that they all thought was real, which is they did not have a bodega, or they didn't like going into their bodega, and that's a feeling that you might want to interrogate as to why you don't feel comfortable in your bodega, and why you don't feel like you can go in there and get your snacks. But also, I mean, there's a really great piece in Eater about this sort of, I forget what the name of the startup is, but this bodega disruption thing. And it was sort of about all the things that they probably won't sell. And there are a lot of sort of like things that are sold in bodegas that tend to be important to like the Black community in New York, like Takis. Like you're not going to get those in a nice fancy vending machine thing in your lobby. And it's one thing to say, hey, I would like to make a vending machine that I can put in the lobby of a building. That's fine. Don't say that you're going to make bodegas obsolete, because that's like a whole different value proposition that you're putting forward into the world. You need to think about what that means. So it's actually, I would say it's worth looking up that press release, because it's sort of a reader in like how to signal that you have not talked to anyone who uses bodegas regularly when you're trying to disrupt bodegas. But yeah, I mean, it's a really great example of a lot of this stuff.
Hi.
Love your shirt.
Thank you. I wanted to get your thoughts on universal basic income from the perspective of people's self-worth and identities wrapped up in their work, and oftentimes, and what kind of shift in beliefs would be necessary to make that, you know, come about.
Yeah, universal basic income is really interesting and really thorny. There have been a couple of sort of studies that have been trying to kind of do small case studies. It's really hard. Universal basic income is hard to do a study on because it has to be universal for you to really know like what's going on. But there have been a couple of small communities that have tried this and have tried to kind of see what happens, and sort of the questions you're asking of like, okay, well, if people aren't working, like what are they doing? And I think that there is enough information now about both sort of from the social sciences world of the way people perceive work and the way that people connect their self-worth to work, and also sort of what happens when your work gets less grueling but stays equally sort of financially sort of viable for you. And it turns out that human beings are like inherently driven to like do things and make things and like have a purpose, right? We all want to have a purpose. And most of the studies that I've seen at least suggest that giving people basic income doesn't necessarily mean that they will just like sit around on a couch all day and like watch Doctor Who or whatever it is. Most people in the study, in sort of small pilots they've done, have like not only have they like continued to either do the job that they had, or they continue to like make things and do things. I mean, also universal basic income isn't like a lot of money. It's like a very small. It's like a basic is the key word there. It sort of gets you by. It doesn't mean you can like buy extra things. It doesn't mean you can go on vacations. It's sort of like a sustaining amount of money. And most of the people in the stuff that I have read felt freed up to do more creative things, and sort of like spend more time with their kids, or like do sort of things that we all think are good, like good things. There's this idea, I think, that like, oh, if we just give everybody money, they'll just like sit around and do drugs and like not do anything. And so far, there's really been no evidence that that's the case. I think the kinds of people who might sit around and do drugs all the time probably have already found that lifestyle, and if it's working for them, then empower them. But yeah, I think that it's really tough. It's a really tough proposition to study, right? And like my background is in science, and I'm always like, how can we know? Like, what studies can we do to see? It's kind of hard without being able to like shut down a city, close it off, and be like, okay, now all of you can't really leave. You have to like do this experiment. We can't turns out not allowed to do that. So I think that it's a really interesting idea, and I think slowly some places are trying it. There was a pilot study in Canada and one, I believe, in India where they did small community, sort of like universal basic income projects. And I haven't read that research in a little while, but it has been something I've been trying to figure out how to tackle on Flash Forward. And it's every time I get into it, I'm like, this is really complicated. It's really hard to like wrap your head around it because there's so many things so many steps that would have to be solved first. I mean, like universal basic income doesn't really make sense unless you have access to healthcare, right? And access to healthcare is like a whole other huge ball of wax, right? And so it, like many things, it is very interconnected to lots of different things. I just feel like I'm rambling and not really answering your question. Does that help?
No, it's very good.
Okay.
Hi. So it seems to me like this futurism concept is sort of predicated on the idea of giving people more autonomy and more control, more power, but outside of a specific group of people seems to have kind of the opposite effect a lot of the time. And I was wondering if you could maybe comment on that.
Sorry, can you say more about what you mean?
So like, if you're a straight white male,
yeah.
Everything about these concepts seems great, right? But like the bodega concept, it's sort of disenfranchising if you're not.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wonder, I don't know, I was just wondering if we could get more of your thoughts on that disconnect.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's sort of the premise of all of this. The idea that like it seems like a great idea to the people who have power, and then they probably haven't asked anyone who doesn't. And I mean, I think to me, when a lot of people ask, like, okay, what's the solution? Like, how do we fix that, right? What's the solution? I mean, it's just to include more people in your like original idea generation, right? If the people in the room that you're working with, if you look around and you're like, wow, all these people remind me of me, that's probably a problem, right? I mean, it is shocking to me how many products go out, or like even just marketing things go out, where I'm like, did you literally have a single woman read this? And like, just one woman read this marketing copy. I recently got a press release that was like, we make no seem like a yes, and I'm like, it seems bad. Like, don't say that. That's not good. Like, don't, like, literally one woman, just one woman, just read the thing. So I mean, some of it is so easy, right? Like, some of it's hard. Some of it's really hard. I mean, like, income inequality is a huge problem, and that is at the root of a lot of this, right? Racial disparity is a huge problem, and that's at the root of a lot of this. I'm not saying that we can just fix those things, it'll be fine, right? Okay, cool. But I do think that like there are some very basic beginning steps that you can take to not make the bodega mistake, right? Which is like literally talk to anyone who works at a bodega or uses a bodega frequently. Or maybe have someone who lives in New York City read your press release before sent out, because that did not happen. So things like that are important. I mean, I think that like your point is like the crux of it, right? That there are people in power who are imagining these futures, and they seem great to those people. And then there's all of the rest of us who are like, wait, what? Or there's people who they haven't thought of, right? I mean, like the disability question is a great one because it's like, you have people who, don't ever ask the top futurists about disability because they'll give you like really horrific answers because they have not thought about it. It just like has not even occurred to them. They probably don't know anyone who's disabled, or they think they don't. Whether there's like invisible disabilities all the time, or they don't talk about it, or they don't see them as people with sort of their own goals and desires. So also like there are not very many people who are at the forefront of futurism. Like there should be just more people who are like given that platform, right? So yes, I agree with you. That is the premise of the talk.
I guess if I can smile.
Yeah.
My real curiosity is like when you're getting experience with these people, these futurists, do you find that this disconnect comes from just a lack of knowledge, or do you think it's like an actual, I don't want to say malicious intent, but what do you think the source is? Is it like hardcore bigotry, or is it just not understand?
I would not draw a super hard line between those two things. I also, yeah, I mean, I try to avoid this question because in some ways it doesn't matter. I mean, like, please don't shout like racial slurs at people, like, don't, that's bad, right? But like, in terms of like impact, I mean, you saw that Google slide, right? Like, tagging Black people as gorillas is like extremely harmful. And that, it doesn't really matter to me that much if the person was like, I'm not gonna do this, or if it was that they just literally didn't think of it. Like, the impact is the same. Intent and impact are important to consider both, but impact is the thing that we see. There are certainly people in New Jersey who are active and malicious, just bad people, but there are a lot of people who aren't, and I don't know that I want to necessarily be like, oh, it's okay because you didn't think of it, you know? That is in and of itself a choice, to have not surrounded yourself with those people, to have not asked those questions, to have not read anything about a thing that you're going to talk about. And I think that, you know, it's easy to, you know, say like, oh, well, they just didn't know. But how many times can you just not know something before it becomes malicious, right? How many times do you get called out about something and you just still decide that you're not going to read about it? Like, at some point you cross the line. And so I think to me, when we talk about this stuff, it's not particularly useful to try to suss out who's the malicious bigot, who's the person who's just oblivious, because at this point in the world, with like Google and everything, like, to be ignorant is a willful choice at this point, especially if you're going to get up on stage and talk about a thing. Do your research. Like, just don't be a jerk.
We have time for a few more.
Scared everyone away.
Many of your examples point to the need for greater diversity in the workforce, and as you say, just talking to a few people. So I'm mystified by the Nikon camera did someone blink. So how can a Japanese corporation not have any Japanese people to try this out on before they release it?
This is a great question, which I have tried to find the answer to. Because, right, I had the same question. I was like, this is made in Japan. It turns out that a lot of the people who Nikon hires for a lot of their facial recognition testing, that whole team, is actually not based in Japan. And also, I mean, a lot of it is the training data, right? The training data that they're using is all white faces. It's amazing to me that there just like isn't a data set for that. I mean, I'm not necessarily advocating for there to be more facial recognition data sets out there for people to build more apps, to recognize more people. I don't necessarily want to go down that road. But yeah, I mean, like 60% of the world's population is Asian, or like would be sort of tick Asian on the box. So right, how does that happen? Great, yeah, it's a great question. I called a bunch of people to try to figure this out, and it turns out that the majority of the team that worked on that particular function is not based in Japan. So yeah, so it's just a basic thing. And the other thing is, what happens sometimes is that you roll the product all the way out, you get to this testing stage, and you figure out that there's this problem, and you're like, I don't have time to fix this, right? Because you're like, this ships in 2 weeks. Like, I cannot fix this because it's such an underlying problem with the data set that you're using. And you have to sort of make a decision as to whether or not you think this is going to be bad enough to be a problem. Nikon decided that they knew, they didn't roll this out not knowing necessarily that this was a problem. They probably did know, but they sort of hoped that it would like not be a thing. I mean, I can't get into their minds. I don't know what they were thinking. But yeah, I mean, a lot of the times too, it's like, you know, I've heard of other cases of similar products or similar rollouts where they had promised there to be, so a lot of things or websites will launch and they are completely inaccessible to a screen reader, which is if you are visually impaired, you use the internet via screen reader where it's like reading the text to you. And a lot of websites just like don't do that, even though many of them say that they do. And if you ask them, they're like, no, we have that. I'm like, I'm literally using it right now and it does not work. Or it just like reads the pop-up that you have to subscribe to your magazine and it doesn't tell you how to get out of that pop-up. So you just literally use that website. So I think a lot of it is also just like you realize at the very end that there's a problem and it's not a company priority to fix it. And that's sort of an incentives problem within a company, right? Like you think, okay, well, how bad is this going to be for us if we just sort of do it and hope no one notices? In this case, they noticed. And I think more and more, especially with social media, companies are getting a little more careful because people do notice. And it's not just like, they don't just show their friends, they like show the internet. Which is a bigger PR problem for them. I think it's largely driven by a PR problem. I don't know that they like care super deeply about it, but yeah, it's a good question. It's a US-based team.
So thanks Rose for the talk, that was awesome, and thanks Kate for organizing, this was a great forum. So my question has to do a little bit with thinking about alternatives to this kind of version of futurism, because I think it's hard to reject futurism altogether. I think all of us in some way or another think of ourselves as engaged with some version or speculating about our own kind of, what our own promised version of what that future might look like. And I think, too, about sort of our own campus is one of these sites where a new design center that's meant to kind of get to model different kinds of interdisciplinary design practice precisely for this kind of prototyping of different forms of interdisciplinary futures gets to be experimented with. So I wonder if you might give us some of your favorite examples that are coming from either campuses or sort of interdisciplinary educational environments, you know, campus in quotes, whatever your version of campus educational environment might look like, that is experimenting with this other version of maybe an engaged version of futuristic practice. And the second question I had that's a sort of extension of that is if you could just mention a couple of your favorite projects too around scientific journalism, because it's obviously a space that you're super engaged in. Model view culture doesn't exist any longer. Yeah, I think of, you know, citizen science projects like Edgy or Plots as some of my favorite examples, but I wonder if you could just tag some of yours.
Yeah, so on the futurism side, Superflux, which made the video that we watched, is great, and they have a ton of projects. They're just like always doing something really thoughtful and interesting. Technocult News is mostly run by Damien Wolven, who I've mentioned before, and it's a space where they talk a lot about sort of the interface between technology and sort of also like mythology and the way that we mythologize tech. So that's a really great space. I think Madeline Ashby, whose name I mentioned before, she's a futurist and she does really interesting stuff. Amy Webb, a lot of these are just sort of people who are like working in their own little universes, but Amy Webb is a really interesting futurist. We don't agree on everything. She's much more sort of like in the world of sort of like corporate consulting, sort of like helping businesses figure out their futures. But she's got, I mean, she knows the research like inside and out, and she can like cite you papers on like, well, this facial recognition and this and this and this, and she's got like all these interesting ideas about that. What was the other person I was going to talk about? Oh, there's a really interesting design team called Object Solutions. And they do these like parody, almost like The Onion made like tech products, but they're very like incisive sort of critiques of the way that like tech sort of tries to offer you like a solution for everything via an object they're selling you. And they made these little commercials for their products that are really, really funny and just like really interesting. So those are futurist people who I think, Adrienne Marie Brown, who I quoted, is amazing, and Wally Marisha is sort of her collaborator. And they wrote a book called Octavia's Brood, and it's a sci-fi collection written by people of color and largely sort of surrounding social justice. And it's really, really interesting. Nydia Okorafor is the other person who I would say is like doing really interesting work. On the science journalism side of things, it's interesting. I feel like it's a lot of the like blogs that we sort of like Kate and I met via sort of like science blogs and stuff like that. A lot of that stuff is kind of like fractured and split, and people are sort of becoming their own like personal brands or whatever that is. But I feel like who's doing interesting work? For a long time, I thought Nautilus was doing really interesting work, and then I feel like recently I've sort of they've sort of turned into like. You know, sometimes Radiolab does those like religion episodes. Like they're like verging into that territory. Who is doing really interesting work? I think that the climate work coming out of the New York Times is actually really good right now. ProPublica is also doing some of the best work on like tech stuff. I mean, they just published a piece about Facebook. Julia Engman's like doing this amazing sort of investigative project about Facebook in general, and she just sort of uncovered a bunch of stuff about the people that Facebook is willing to sell ads to. They're not good people, spoiler alert. So yeah, I mean, you can sell ads. She did this investigation. You can sell ads specifically targeting people who have like killing Jews in their like interests. Like you can buy ads to advertise with people, which seems bad. Is bad. I don't think I have to say seems there. So ProPublica is doing some really interesting tech reporting right now. But I don't know, it's interesting, like Method is gone. Method Quarterly was sort of a really interesting publication that was about sort of science and the way that we think about science and sort of like culture and all of these things sort of put together. But now I feel like they're just like writers in various places. Jenna Wortham at the New York Times is always really great about like tech and culture. But yeah, I feel like I like follow writers now more than I like am going to places on the web. That's.
And our last question.
Yeah, hi. As a futurist, I was asked, why is the future not knowable? It's kind of technical. The question I'm asking is, why is the future not knowable as a futurist?
Why is it what? I'm sorry.
The future not knowable.
Not knowable.
Knowable.
Knowable. No, I'm so sorry. Knowable.
And the second question is, do you think robots will take over the whole?
Great. You know, everyone's thinking it, and you asked it. I love it. The future is not knowable. The future is not knowable because we don't understand everything, which is an obvious answer, but also sometimes easy to forget. It feels like we have control of our own little area, and I'm like, I know where I'm going to eat, and what I'm going to do, and whatever. And then there's like this whole sort of like powers of 10 extrapolation out. I think also because you can plot out what you think is going to happen based on data and be like, okay, well, we know this and we know this, and probably, you can make some good guesses about, cell phones are going to get bigger, smaller. You can make some good guesses about these sort of like bounded things. But I mean, like, the reason we have supercomputers is because somebody figured out that if you get metal like really, really cold or really, really hot, like these are things that they weren't trying to make any of the stuff that they were making. And so you end up with these sort of, this is why interdisciplinary science is good, right? Because you have like chemists do a thing, and then all of a sudden you have like microchips. Like, well, not all of a sudden. It's not magic. I wish we were like, woo! No, but like, and eventually, like that, like turns out if you get it, if you get gas really, really, really cold, like this thing happens to it, and then like, and then that can be turned into this, and no one thought that's what they were doing at the time. That's great, because if we knew everything, it would be so boring, right? Like, do we know the crises in the world? I think also because the future is not knowable because we refuse to listen to each other. It's like another key part of it. A lot of people are talking about the future. A lot of people have like predicted some of the things that are happening right now and have said like, hey, this is bad. Like the rise of white supremacy in the US has been predicted and talked about by people for 15 years. And like now everyone's like, oh no, like, who could have thought? It's like, you even listen to the people. So like we don't listen to each other. We particularly don't listen to like disenfranchised people. And that's like, they know what's going on. So I think that's another part of it. Robots. I do not think that robots are going to take over the world in the sense that I don't think they're going to be like marching down the street being like, all right, you guys, line up on the wall, like, whatever. Robots will take over the world in the sense that they will take jobs. They will like be a huge part of what we do. The idea that we are going to have a sentient AI, an AI that can actually sort of communicate on the level of a human, I don't know any legitimate computer scientists who think that that's doable in the next 100 years. So we're fine. We'll be fine. Who knows, right? Like, the future's unknowable. We don't know, right? It could happen. But I think that the idea, I think AI is actually a really perfect, another example of like what we're afraid of right now. Like right now we're really afraid of jobs being lost, and like, because people are losing their jobs for other reasons, but we're gonna like blame robots, because why not? People are really worried about subjugation, right? And robots are like a key way to talk. And in all of science fiction, robot allegories are slave allegories, right? Because they're about like subjugating an entire group of people that is sentient and like then ask them to do your bidding. I think we're really thinking about that a lot now, like power structures and power dynamics. You can track the rise and fall of people worrying about robots with sort of the rise and fall of like income inequality and sort of like all of this other stuff. So I think that robots are a great way to talk about some of those things without talking about it, because people are scared to talk about things that are messy and difficult and hard and maybe make them reflect a little bit on their own privilege, perhaps. But we talk about robots, and that's fine, because you don't have to interact with a robot in your day-to-day life. But in terms of like, are robots going to actually like rise up and kill us? We're not going to worry about that. Or at least I'm not going to worry about that. I don't think you should either.